Hi everybody, this is Kate Wakelin from Neuroendocrine Cancer coming to you on Friday the 18th of December 2020 and this is the final Facebook Friday that we'll be broadcasting to you this year, and probably many of you will be relieved to see the end of 2020. So we've got some things to talk about today which I'm excited to share with you, but before I wanted to continue, I wanted to just acknowledge the traditional owners of the land that I am broadcasting to you from, which is the land of the Wurundjeri people and of the Kulin Nation. I would just like to pay my respects to elders past, present and emerging. One of the things I deeply appreciate about the land where I live is being very close to the Yarra River, which is called the Birrarung in the Woiwurrung language. So I'm very grateful for where I live, and I know that people are joining me from all various corners of Australia, and so just extend that acknowledgement of country to wherever you are watching from, knowing that we've also got people who watch later on via YouTube from other regions around the world. So welcome to everybody who's joining us today. So just a couple of things COVID related. We don't always spend a lot of time these days talking about COVID, but there's probably a couple of emerging things that I do want to just briefly focus on. The first thing is, unless you've been living under a rock in Australia, you'll know that there's been an outbreak in Sydney, in particular the Northern Beaches area. So firstly, if you're in Sydney and particularly in those areas that are affected, we just send you our best wishes and our love from everywhere else in Australia. We're thinking of you, and we know that in South Australia there was what seemed like a similar kind of outbreak, and South Australia were really successful in getting that under control quite rapidly, and so I'm so hoping that this is just a minor blip. But I guess it's a good reminder to us all that, we've all got people coming from overseas who might have more coronavirus in their local community, and we know that it's a very contagious disease. So even in states where it feels like there is no community transmission at all, a few days ago that's how New South Wales were feeling too, and now everyone's retracing their steps from the last week or so and thinking about what shops and what cafes and what bars and restaurants and things they've been in. So I guess it's a good reminder for us all to just try and remember to do all of the things that we've been trying to remember to do for such a long time now, and it's so easy to get complacent. But hand washing, physical distancing, especially in crowded enclosed spaces, and mask wearing is recommended for people with cancer. And I know that's tough if you're the only person wearing a mask, but for your own protection, when you're affected by cancer, we know that coronavirus isn't a good thing. Well, it's not a good thing for anyone to get, but when you're affected by cancer and perhaps your immunity is a bit lower, then we worry about you and corona. So we're just wanting everyone to be as safe as possible. There's also emerging changes about border closures and things that were all kind of coming onto my news feed right as we went live today. So if you're planning travel, then it's just a reminder to check your local guidelines before you hop in the car or so forth. So yeah, our thoughts and prayers and love and everything to Sydney and the northern beaches of Sydney. I just hope you all manage to stay safe and that we can get this under control really fast. The other thing related to coronavirus that I did want to talk about was a clinical trial that's come up at Peter Mac. It's called the C-SMART trial, and I was hoping to get some information for you today about this, and I do have some information, and some of it I'm watching this space. So if there's an update, then I'll certainly hop into the Facebook Live, into the Facebook private discussion group and give whatever information we can in terms of updates. So it's a randomized controlled trial, and it's an acknowledgement that people with cancer, we do have concerns about them and their well-being with coronavirus. So there is some evidence that people who might be immunocompromised because of their cancer treatments or because of their cancers might be more vulnerable to getting more ill with coronavirus. So we're doing a lot of work on vaccines, and I'm really looking forward to giving you some more detailed information about what's actually going to be rolled out in Australia. So I can't say anything firmly, but it seems really likely that people with cancer will be able to have a vaccine. So it's, none of the vaccines are live vaccines, which means that probably it will be available to people with cancer. But the tricky thing is that if you're immunocompromised because of your cancer, you might not have as robust an immune response to the vaccine. And so there are some, we don't have data on this, it's all speculative, but there is a level of concern that people with cancer who are immunocompromised who have the vaccine, maybe that might not be quite as effective as for the general community. So we're looking for ways in which we might be able to boost the resilience of people with cancer against the virus. So this trial is actually trialing a substance that we've been using for a very long time called interferon, and it's being administered via a daily nasal spray. It's actually quite a complex trial. I printed out the clinicaltrials.gov record before I came on board, and it's taken 21 pages from my printer, so it's quite a complex trial. There's 4 arms. The first arm is really looking at whether, for people who haven't had a coronavirus, or that they don't know that they've had a coronavirus exposure, what sort of protection the spray might offer, both in terms of rates of transmission or rates of getting the disease, but or getting the virus, but also how sick people might get with the COVID-19 disease. I'm losing my train of thought here, I apologise. Various other arms are actually looking at people who know they've had an exposure, they've been in close contact. For people who have a confirmed diagnosis of they've been exposed to they're COVID-19 or coronavirus positive, and so the outcomes are really looking at whether you may be less likely to contract COVID-19, but also how sick you might get with coronavirus. So these sorts of studies are interesting in Australia because at the moment we have very low numbers, but knowing that we can get very rapid increases in transmission, for example in Sydney at the moment, it's a very worthwhile trial to be doing. There's a few, like any clinical trial, there are inclusion and exclusion criteria. So there's some common ones that we expect for most clinical trials. For example, you need to be over 18. So for this trial, you need to have had any solid tumour. I didn't look at haematological tumours because I was just really looking at NETs. So NETs do fall under the classification of a solid tumour. You do need to have had cancer treatment for that cancer over the preceding 12 months. Now, in terms of treatments, they're talking in the clinical trial information, they're talking about chemotherapy, radiotherapy, immunotherapy, so those sort of the more mainstream treatments. I have sent a query off to the investigators to ask about somatostatin analogues and whether they would be considered cancer treatment that could be included. So I'll let you know when I hear more about that, because a lot of people with NETs are just on somatostatin analogues. So obviously you're going to want to know whether it's even a trial for you. It's starting off at Peter Mac, but it is going around other centres around Australia, so in other states. So as I said, as soon as I know more information about where it's being launched and particularly around the somatostatin analogues, I'll get back in touch with everybody about that. So it's interesting and it's exciting, and I guess the hope is that by using the nasal spray, it might sort of boost the resilience of the nasal passages, I think is the hypothesis, which might mean that you're less likely to contract the virus and to get ill from the disease. So it's a watch this space. So today look, again, if you're not hiding under a rock, you'll have seen the decorations that are everywhere, and knowing that we're coming very close to the festive season, and knowing that, that's not just about Christmas for everybody, but it's about lots of other religious festivals, but also for many families, Christmas is a time where there's an expectation and a tradition to get together, to have maybe some special food, maybe some special drinks, maybe spend some time together as a family or as close friends. So there's a lot of expectations around that. And look, what we know, even just for the general community, is that Christmas is a really stressful time for most people. You only have to go out onto the roads and see the people who are vying for car spots in shopping centres and trying to get through traffic. It's a little bit weird this year because of the pandemic. Certainly in Melbourne, the traffic's nowhere near as interesting as it normally would be. But still we see people who are suffering under the strain of those increased expectations of ourselves. Couple that with going through cancer, and when you're going through treatment, you may be fatigued, you may have side effects. There might be very real worries about, how you're going to go long term. So there's that underlying level of stress and anxiety with cancer, and put that on top of Christmas, and you get a little bit of a firecracker sometimes, and maybe not such a pleasant firecracker. And then this year we've also got the pandemic on top of all of that. So I think this year is going to be one where we need to pay particular attention to our well-being, and to check in with ourselves, and just to be careful about our expectations of ourselves and of those around us, because I think most people have actually found it pretty challenging to cope with all. Any one of those things makes it difficult to cope, and we've got all three going on in our community. So there are some really good resources, and I will put some links up in the notes with this. So over the next few hours, I'll put some notes up in the Facebook private discussion group, and there'll be some notes in the YouTube section of the video. Yeah, it's time for a break for Kate, isn't it? So apologies, my mum stumbling speech. But there are some tips that in talking to people with cancer over many years, I think are worthwhile really focusing on, which we'll talk about now. So the first thing is just to check your expectations, and to check the expectations of people around you. And sometimes when it's a tradition, the default position is to do what you've always done, or to expect that you would do what you've always done. So, for many people, even in Australia where it can be 40 degrees on Christmas Day, a lot of people are still sweating over an oven and trying to produce a turkey that's not dried out, and survive being very hot and flustered in not really baked dinner kind of weather. For a lot of people, there is an expectation that they're going to be filled with happiness and joy, and peace and goodwill, and all of those beautiful, lovely feelings, and maybe they're actually not necessarily feeling that great on the inside, but there can be this expectation that we'll kind of fake it till we make it on Christmas Day. Often there's the expectation that it's around getting together with family and friends, and that we all get along perfectly together. Families are really complex things, and when you put them all in a room together when they're not used to being all in a room together, and when everyone's a bit stressed, that can be really, really challenging and really, really difficult. So often the expectations we've got of ourselves and of others, even without cancer in the mix, are pretty high and maybe a bit unrealistic. And then with cancer in the mix, that's sometimes even more unrealistic. So a lot of people with cancer will have fatigue, will need to have a rest. A lot of people with cancer we know that finances are especially tight when you're going through this sort of situation, and that, in nets, that can be a very long-term financial kind of tightness. People with nets, there's also a whole heap of dietary and gut issues that you're contending with. So I guess it's just an opportunity in the week leading up to Christmas to just check in with what your expectations are and if that's realistic, because often that's where the pain point is, isn't it? It's when there's a big gap between what you expect to happen and then what the reality is. And if we can adjust our expectations and maybe set the bar a little bit lower and extend a little bit of grace to ourselves and to those around us, maybe then there's a bit less of a pain point. There's a bit less of a gap between our expectations and actually what the reality is going to be. Sometimes it's worthwhile thinking about it a bit like a budget and say, well, what have we got available this year? And certainly, we think of budgets with money, but also thinking about budgets in terms of our energy might be a really useful way of looking at it. So it might be saying, well, look, let's still to get together, but let's see how it's going after an hour and a half. Maybe it's actually around saying, well, look, let's just do some cold things. Let's do some salads and cold cuts of meat. Let's sort of pare down, simplify some of the expectations around food. Maybe it's around accepting help or asking for help, or maybe, compromising and maybe buying things that you might have ordinarily, made, in terms of things like a Christmas pudding or a Christmas cake. Maybe you're a person who loves to bake, but we might just need to compromise and settle for something that's, maybe not quite what we wanted, but, maybe it's going to be, a way of reducing that gap between the expectations and the reality. So checking the expectations is really helpful. I think communication is really key, and especially again in these days leading up to Christmas, I guess we've got an opportunity to really, having considered our expectations of what we think we can manage on the day, then being able to communicate that gently and kindly and clearly to those around us. And I know that's tough. As I said, families are complex beasts, and in Christmas time when people are stressed, it's even more complex and tricky. But sometimes preempting, having that conversation now so that people can kind of go away and think about it, and, so maybe they'll be a little bit less surprised on Christmas Day if you need to go and have a nap for an hour or so, or if you're going to bring your own food because that's the stuff that's going to agree with your tummy, and you don't want to be, spending Boxing Day on the loo, so it's around communicating clearly and gently and kindly with the people who you're going to be spending Christmas with, or that you may need to be spending a little bit less of Christmas with, so that they can adjust their expectations as well. There's a really good podcast, which I'll put a link to, and it's around family dynamics. And actually it's useful for far more than just Christmas time, but I think Christmas time's often when we're really focusing on this stuff. So I'll make sure there's a link to the Family Dynamics podcast in the notes. It's through the Cancer Council, and there's another really great resource from the Cancer Council, which has got some helpful tips and strategies for managing Christmas as well. So I'll make sure that's there as well. Just going back to food for a moment. So a lot of the things that are on the list for Christmases, like, Christmas pudding that might be full of dried fruits, so for people with NETs with a really fussy gut, that could be a problem. If you're a person who gets fat malabsorption because of somatostatin analog injections, a great big lushing helping of custard and brandy cream and normal cream and ice cream on your pudding, and a cut of meat that's got a lot of fat on it. If you get fat malabsorption, I guess just be prepared. You might still choose, you might make an informed choice to eat the food, to drink the alcohol, whatever it is, but I guess be a little bit prepared to have a quiet day. The next day there might be some gut disturbances. It's a calculated risk for a lot of people with NETs, and so if you're like, well, hang on, I'm just going to go there on Christmas Day, then be prepared. Maybe again adjust your expectations about what Christmas night might look like. You might want to have some more wet wipes available, or some barrier cream, or to manage your guts afterwards. The other thing just to note is that a lot of places, I know that all of this, but a lot of pharmacies have a shutdown period. A lot of hospitals have reduced services over Christmas. So again, this week before is an opportunity to make sure that you've got all of the stuff you need. So whether that's your normal medications, whether it's making sure you've got enough things like chemotherapy and your normal tablets to get you through, but maybe if sometimes you resort to gastrostop or Imodium, those sorts of things, then this is a good time to make sure that you've got some in the cupboard. Maybe some Mylanta even might be a good opportunity to just check in with your levels of your medications that you might need over this period. Make sure that you've had some communication from your treatment team about what their level of coverage is going to be over this time. So a lot of people do take the opportunity, and health professionals are no different, that they take a little bit of time off. But every doctor will have a covering clinician who will be there to cover if there are things that crop up, because often they do crop up over Christmas. So it's a really good idea to check in with them ahead of time so you know the details of who's going to be that person for you, who's the go-to call person. You don't want to be stuck on 11 o'clock in the evening on Christmas Eve, all of a sudden needing medical advice and making lots of phone calls and chasing your tail. It's really great to have that information up front. If you are travelling, and I know that's less likely over this year with the pandemic, but a lot of people are still doing some travel. So this is an opportunity to make sure that your treatment and wellness care plan is up to date. Make sure that all of the treatments that you've had over the last 12 months, any contact details of new practitioners, make sure that they're in there and that's up to date. And make sure you take that document with you so that if something crops up and you're away from home, you need to, present to a country hospital or a country GP or someone who's not familiar with your history and your disease, that you've got that there with you. So that's it's like having a passport, and it's a really great sort of at a glance summary of the things that a health professional who might not be familiar with you really needs to know. So I guess one of the things around living with a big life-changing situation like cancer, whether that's a new diagnosis, whether that's something that you've been living with a long time, or something that you're really living in the aftermath of, there's so much grief associated with every stage of that cancer experience. And even though our expectations of ourselves at Christmas time are often that we'll be feeling joyous and happy and singing Christmas carols, often actually this is the time where sadness can also feel more acute. Sometimes it's the first Christmas where you're living with this as a person who's got cancer now. For some people, it's actually facing that first Christmas without someone in their lives, or with someone in their life who they're really worried about, and they're worried about, well, what might the next Christmas look like? There's all sorts of layers to that. And so feelings of grief and sadness are really, really common and really normal. And sometimes, the best thing to do is just not to fight it and to go with it, and just to be honest and go, okay, this is going to be a day where I've got real mixed feelings, and I might be eating delicious food and spending time with people who I dearly love, and yet there's deep sadness there. So it's okay to express it. It's actually better to not bottle it up and to actually express that. Sometimes if it's a first Christmas after something big like a new diagnosis, or discovering that the cancer has come back, or living with bereavement, sometimes going to those old traditions can actually just trigger so much pain, and it's actually sometimes easier to think about new traditions and to treat this as an opportunity to, okay, we're not going to do Christmas the way we always did it. We're going to do something else, or maybe actually even take a rain check on Christmas and go for a drive for a picnic. Sometimes it's about, maybe there's a lot of eating places that are open on Christmas Day these days. So maybe take the pressure off completely of the home thing and go out somewhere, even if it's very informal. But yeah, maybe it's about taking a rain check on Christmas and just saying to everybody, look, we're just going to have a quiet one this year, and, check in with us in January, and we're just going to have a quiet one and light a candle, and spend some time just really honouring what's been a pretty tough year. It's okay to express hard feelings when it's Christmas Day. I guess the other thing is that if especially if you're a person who's living with cancer, it's worthwhile thinking ahead of time about, well, what's your escape route going to be? If you think I'm going to be fine, but you find either that your body's just not playing the game that day, or emotionally you're just not really in it. You know, it's just not happening for you. You're just not feeling it. It's worthwhile having an escape route. It might be just worthwhile wording up your family and friends and go, look, I'll turn up, but please, you know, don't take it personally if I'm gonna, if I buzz off after half an hour and need to have a rest, or look, if I opt out after first course, and you know, please don't take it personally. Please don't be offended. You know, it's the way things are this year, and again, it's about sort of adjusting those expectations so there's less of a gap between the expectation and the reality. And the other thing that I think is just really important to consider is, well, what are your supports going to be this year, this Christmas, this holiday season? So, you know, for a lot of people, it's their family and friends. But again, if everyone's stressed, it might just be worthwhile sort of thinking about, okay, who else can I call? Who else can I be? You know, who can be there for me? Can be that listening ear? Can be that kind sense of wisdom if I'm just not feeling great, if it's a struggle this year. So, you know, maybe that's friends outside of your family unit. Maybe for a lot of people that might be actually our support group. So our Facebook private discussion group will remain open over the holiday season. Even if there are health professionals like myself who are taking a break, we will still be monitoring this space. And one of the things that I'm interested, particularly for our Facebook private discussion group, is that there is an opportunity to create a live chat room. So there might be people who are interested in, you know, suggesting a 4 o'clock on Christmas afternoon, if you're feeling lonely, if you're just wanting to check in with your people, your unicorns, your fellow unicorns, you know, so that is an option that is open to you. It's not something that we've done a lot in the Facebook private discussion group, but both the discussion group and the carers group have that facility available. So it is okay to check that out with the other people in those communities and see if there are other people who might also like to do that on Christmas Day or Boxing Day or Christmas Eve. In terms of Neuroendocrine Cancer Australia, we will be closing the office for a little while, so that includes myself. So my last day in the office is actually next Tuesday, the 22nd of December. We're going to finish with a live Zoom group. So for the people who are in our Facebook private discussion group, we're having a Zoom group meeting that evening. So that's interesting. I don't know why I thought it would be a good idea to have an evening meeting on the last day in the office, but that will be what it will be. If you're in that group or you want to come along, it's okay. You're welcome for the first time. If you haven't done it before, it's not that hard. You're welcome to wear silly Christmas antlers if you would like, or not. If you don't feel like that, it's okay to be eating something delicious or sipping something lovely like a chamomile tea or something stronger. And there's no guest speaker, there's no agenda with that meeting, but it's really a chance to connect with other people who are going through a similar situation, and particularly in the lead up to Christmas. So you're welcome to join us for that. I'm going to be coming back to the office on Monday the 11th of January, so I've got a couple of weeks off, like the previous time where I did take a holiday, I'm trying to just take a complete break and to turn off emails, and the phone will be turned off. So look, that doesn't mean don't send me an email or don't ring me during that time, but please know there will be out of office greetings on all of those things, and I will get back to you as soon as I'm able to when in the new year. Sometimes there could be a bit of a lag, so sometimes I can get back to the office in January and find that there's quite a lot of people who've got in touch with me, and so if you're leaving a message, I may not be able to call you straight back on the first day back, but I'll do my best to get back in touch with you all in that first week. If you do leave me a message, I'll make sure my contact details are in the notes. We will have one staff member who will be not taking all of that time on leave. So that's our project officer, Meredith Cummins. Now, Meredith has got a background as a net nurse, and we're incredibly privileged to have her on our team, and she will be able to potentially help out. So it's not an emergency, it's not a crisis support service, it's not an emergency service. And if you're looking for general net nurse information and support, the best thing is to actually give my number a call, and I'll get back to you as soon as I'm in the office. But if you get unstuck, if something crops up and you need some help a little bit more quickly, and as I said, not an emergency service, but if something does crop up, there will be, on my out of office, there will be Meredith's phone number on there for you if you need to. And I would just ask you to treat that number with the due care and respect that I know you will, knowing that we don't want to misuse that, but yes, she is there for that, and we're very grateful to you, Meredith, for being available in that way for our community. The other thing to mention is that the 13 11 20 number, so this is in Australia and it's the Cancer Council line, that's staffed by health professionals, often nurses, but some states do have other health professionals who staff that line, and that will be available every day that's not a public holiday. So bear that in mind too. A lot of the nurses and other health professionals on that 13 11 20 line, we've talked with them for many years, and a lot of them do actually know quite a lot about nets these days. So I would really encourage you, if you're having a day where you just think, oh gosh, I just feel like I really need to just debrief with someone or get some tips and strategies, or I don't know who else to call, then 13 11 20, if you're in Australia, is going to be a really great resource for you. So that's really all that I wanted to cover today, except to say, my goodness, you're all amazing for so successfully thriving in such a difficult year. It's been a year like no other, and I know that there's going to be lots of people reflecting over what 2020 has been over the coming couple of weeks. And as I said earlier, I think it's going to be a year that a lot of us feel a bit relieved to say goodbye to. But actually, there's been some really amazing things that I don't want to escape from, without celebrating, without sort of commemorating and going, wow, look what we did. And, one of the things about this year is that our Facebook private discussion group had an enormous amount of growth, so 20%. So we're now at 1,300 members. We also had the Facebook Friday videos start, and we've actually had many thousands of views on this video. So thank you everybody to everyone who's joined us over the past about 9 months since we started these videos. You've been extraordinarily patient with some of the technical difficulties, especially at the very beginning. We've heard from some great speakers, both in terms of health professionals, but actually also some patients and some carers and people who have really travelled that path with nets. I've certainly learnt huge amounts over the weeks, both about nets and managing and the treatments and the clinical trials and all sorts of things, but I've also learned a bit more about the technical side of video broadcasting, so that's been a new one for me. But yeah, I just wanted to thank you all for joining us every week. It's been a really it's been a silver lining for 2020 for me, this particular aspect, and it's been a way of reaching more people than I've been able to over the phone. So yeah, it's been a joy to join you every week for this. So I just wanted to thank you and to wish you all the very best over the holiday season, whatever that's going to look like for you. I really hope that it's a time when you can just sort of stop and rest and reflect a little bit and celebrate some of the things that you've done over the year that have been extraordinary, especially under the circumstances. It's a time to thank the people in our lives who've been significant, and yeah, so I hope it's a meaningful and special and restful time for you all, and I can't wait to get back in January to rejoin you. We've got a few things up our sleeves in terms of Facebook Fridays. I'm really hoping that early in the new year we'll be able to get someone along to talk a bit more about coronavirus vaccines and immunity, and once we know a little bit more information about what vaccines will look like in Australia. There's lots of other potential guest speakers that I've got up my sleeve as well, but we're really interested to hear from you at this point in time. So what's worked for you, what would you like to see more of? Do you want to hear more stories of people who have experienced NETs? Would you like more carers? Is there a different sort of health professional that you would like us to see if we can interview for Facebook Friday? Are there other questions that you would like us to work on? And as I said, I've got a list. There's still a few from this year that are in my homework box, so we've got plenty to work on, but very keen to hear your feedback. So I think I'm going to leave it there for today. So yeah, just I hope you all have a lovely Christmas or a Hanukkah or whatever it is that you and your family will be spending time doing over this next couple of weeks. And I'll look forward to seeing you in the new year. Take care, everybody.